Hello everybody and welcome to the Penelope Possum channel. And this is me, your lovely host, Penelope the Possum. I don't know why that was so hard for me to say. I think there's something wrong with my brain tonight, guys. Usually I'm able to get through the intro without much issue. But before we get started with some Dr. Bob reaction and some IMR Scary Tale reaction, I wanted to talk about something that is somewhat important to me. Why is powdered tea drink mix like those? Hi. Hello. You know those drink mix powders you can buy at the supermarket? You know those drink powders you can buy in bulk at supermarkets? You know the tea flavored ones? Why are those like awful? I have tried so many generic name brand. I've tried so many. But one common thread in all of them is that they shit. You do know those? Good. I would imagine most people would know those. They're common sight in most places. But why are they so bad when they're tea flavored? Let me rephrase. They're not bad, but they're not tea flavored. Why though? Tea is a drink already. I've tried lemonade once and those ones are great. Lemonade's a wonderful drink. Fruit punch ones. Can't beat it. Every other one that's a drink and any other flavor you can get is great. But as soon as you add the tea flavor to it, it's terrible. What the heck? Why? Where in the process did you add something that would be bad? Tea is a good flavor. And before some dumbass comes in the comments later or something and says tea is just leaf water, coffee is just bean water.
The train station buzzed with life, a cacophony of voices blending with the rhythmic clatter of trains arriving and departing. Farewells and reunions swirled around, filled with hope and sorrow. Amidst the crowd, a mother clutched a small, weathered box to her chest, her hands trembling. "Don't do anything brave," she urged, her voice tight as she gazed up at her son. Though he stood tall in her eyes, he was still the child she had raised, full of dreams. The son forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The sharp whistle of the train cut through the noise, a reminder of the time slipping away. He leaned down and embraced her, as though trying to still the storm of dread swirling inside him. "Take this." She pressed the box into his hands. "Don't ever open it. But if you're captured, give it to them as a gift." The boy took the box from his mother. "Do you promise me?" "I promise," he said, feeling the weight of...
I'm guessing this is World War I? Can I make this bigger? That's better.
The weight of her words.
Yeah, I got a package of the peach tea one. Just tried it. It is ass. But why? Why is it ass? I want an explanation.
He glanced at his little sister, her wide eyes filled with innocence as she sat in her wheelchair. Leaning down, he kissed her gently on the forehead. Be brave, she whispered, the sincerity of her words piercing through the noise around them. The train's whistle shrieked again, and the boy stepped back, his heart aching as he waved one last goodbye. The train lurched into motion, pulling him away from everything familiar into the unknown. The battlefield air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. The boy, having quickly become a young man from the demands of war, gripped his rifle tighter. Try as he might, the sound of explosions and gunfire drowned out all thoughts of home as battle raged all around him. "Get down!" a voice shouted, and he dove into a trench, just as an explosion rocked the earth nearby. The young man fought fiercely.
I think I might end up giving the remainder of these tea sachets to somebody I don't like. There are very few people in this world I can genuinely say I dislike, and even fewer I can say I genuinely hate. For the most part, I don't really care. I am a passer through of life. What right do I have to hate or dislike most people? But there are some people who genuinely do deserve powdered tea.
Fiercely, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each encounter was a blur of movement and instinct. Every moment, a razor-thin line between life and death. In the thick of the fighting, the din of war faded, leaving only the pounding of his own heart echoing in his ears. He saw his comrades fall, one by one, their lives...
Another thing I thought of, has anybody tried, like, the squeeze bottles of tea flavor? Like the liquid version of the powder? Has anyone tried that tea flavored? 'Cause if someone has in the chat tonight or in the comments down below, let me know if they're any good.
Extinguished
or if they're
in an
just
instant.
as bad as their
It was a
powdered
relentless
cousins.
tide of violence, and he was swept along with it. But then, in a moment, everything changed. A large blast threw him off his feet. Dazed and disoriented, he looked up to see enemy soldiers approaching,
Oh no.
their faces shrouded in grim determination.
No?
Before he could
Dang.
react, they seized him, dragging him and the few other soldiers that were still alive away from the battlefield they had fought so fiercely to defend. The soldiers dragged him through the mud, and the young man glanced up. Through blurred eyes, he could just barely see where they were taking him. Towards a large trench where others of his fellow soldiers were already lined up. He watched as they were shot without warning
Oh my
and
God.
tumbled back into the mass grave. Suddenly, his mother's parting words filled his ears.
Give it to them as a gift.
"Wait!" the young man hoarsely shouted. "Please, wait! I have something to offer you." The soldiers dragging him abruptly stopped and looked at each other with
Oh, dear.
skepticism. "What do you mean?" one demanded. "You have information?" "I have this," he said, pulling the small box from his pocket, the one his mother had given him. The one he had managed to keep safe with him this whole time, across countless battles and hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles of
War
war.
is horrifying.
The soldiers
guys.
looked at each other again, and their skepticism turned into mockery. The two men both began to laugh as one of them snatched the box from the young man's hands. Without pausing, he opened the box, tossing the wooden lid to the ground. "What's this? A treasure?" he mockingly asked. The object in the box glinted in the light. It wasn't a treasure at all, just a simple silver spoon. His laughter stopped. "Very well. In repayment, you won't die. Not here, at least." The young man didn't have any time to question what this meant, though, since a club immediately struck the back
Oh,
of his
shoot.
head, sending him into a deep, dark black. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a damp, dark cell, raucous laughter echoing off the walls. The same soldiers who had taken him on the battlefield were now sitting with several others, talking to each other in their native tongue. The one who had dragged the young man began to act out a pantomime of the young man offering him the box, much to the amusement of his fellow soldiers. The young man watched through
hope
the
they
bars of
get
his cell as the
absolutely
soldier now
destroyed.
reached into the box and grabbed the spoon, holding it up like a war trophy as the group laughed harder and harder, none more than the one holding the spoon. His laughter, though, abruptly stopped, and a sharp crack echoed through the room, louder than any bullet. The soldier's body twisted grotesquely, his spine bending backward with an
my
unnatural
goodness.
snap.
I mean, I couldn't say it didn't happen to better people.
His eyes bulged wide, panic overtaking his once smug face before he crumpled to the ground. The rest of the soldiers gasped and stepped back, horrified at what they had just seen. But try as they might, none of them could look away. Their compulsive curiosity forced them all to keep looking at the twisted body of their friend, or, more specifically, at the spoon he still clutched in his hand. Slowly, carefully, one of the soldiers stepped forward, kneeled down,
I'm
and
wondering
reached for the
how.
spoon. He had to work to pry it from the paralyzed hand of his comrade, and the moment he gripped the handle, another crack rang out, even louder this time, as he too saw his spine fold backwards at a perfect 90-degree angle.
Oh,
The soldier fell to the floor, the spoon dropping to the ground near
holy
him.
dooly.
But the other soldiers didn't run. Just like their friend, one by one, they each watched in turn as another picked up the spoon, and immediately upon having a firm grip, saw their body contort backwards at a right angle. The young man couldn't believe
Holy
what was
moly.
happening. Soldier after soldier watched, waiting for their turn to be bent backwards, until finally, only one was left. He struggled, trying to resist the strange compulsion to pick up the cursed spoon, but he couldn't. He too joined his comrades, his spine snapping as his body collapsed to the floor. As the last soldier fell, so too did the spoon, landing not far from the young man's cell. He could suddenly feel it calling to him. He didn't just want to hold the spoon, he needed it. If he just reached out through the bars of his cell, he could almost touch it. Shouts in a language he barely understood echoed in from the corridor.
dang.
Moments later, the door to the damp room swung open with a loud bang. A group of soldiers, with different uniforms from those who had captured him, stormed in. One of the soldiers surveilled the scene, the soldiers that lay twisted and broken on the ground. "What in the hell happened here?" he exclaimed, his gaze landing on the silver spoon. As the soldier curiously reached for the spoon, the sergeant inadvertently kicked it away and pointed at the young man's cell. "Get him out!" he barked. His command snapped the soldiers into action. "Please, the spoon!" the young man cried, his voice desperate and frantic. But the soldiers didn't understand the language he was speaking. They were too busy fishing through the pockets of the fallen soldiers, trying to find keys to his cell. "Calm down, we're trying to help you, son," the sergeant replied, his tone
Oh, my
edged with
goodness.
annoyance. Finally, one soldier finds the keys. The door to his cell swings open, and the young man dives to the ground. The Allied soldiers exchanged awkward glances. They initially believed the young man was dropping to his knees in gratitude for being saved. Instead, he was scrambling across the dirt floor, desperately searching for something. "I think he's looking for this," one of the soldiers said, holding up the spoon by the tip of its handle. The young man's eyes widened. "That's mine!" he shouted, lunging toward it. Several Allied soldiers grabbed the young man, unsure of his intentions, but as he
dear.
moved, the soldier with the spoon instinctively tightened his grip on it. A loud crack pierced the air. Everyone turned just in time to see the Allied soldier bend backward at a perfect 90-degree angle, his face contorting in pain and shock as he collapsed to the ground. A wave of compulsive curiosity began to spread among the soldiers as they stared at the scene. One by one, they all started to move closer to the spoon. Their sergeant, a seasoned SCP agent who had decided to join the fight against tyranny and whose long service with the Foundation had given him experience with strange anomalies, barked out a sharp command. "Leave it!" he shouted, catching one of his men just as he touched the handle with the tips of his fingers. "Everybody step back!" The urgency in his voice snapped the soldiers out of their daze. They instinctively moved aside, creating space between themselves and the spoon's sinister aura. Slowly,
Terrifying.
carefully, the sergeant knelt down and scooped the spoon into the wooden box, his movements deliberate and steady. As the young man watched the sergeant slide the box's lid closed, he couldn't help but chuckle bitterly to himself. The very object that was meant to protect him had almost become the harbinger of his death.
Yeesh.
This seemingly harmless object, now classified as SCP-463, is deceptively simple: a spoon that bends its victims. When gripped by human hands, it forces their spine to snap backward at a 90-degree angle just below the T6 thoracic vertebra, resulting in near instantaneous death or severe paralysis. Its effects are immediate and unavoidable. no gloves, barriers, or protective gear can prevent the violent contortions. Despite its mundane appearance, SCP-463 has claimed multiple lives during testing. Strangely, it only affects humans, showing no unusual properties when handled by non-human subjects. Even indirect contact, such as through gloves, does nothing to reduce its deadly impact, suggesting the spoon possesses some sort of psychic or anomalous trigger. Researchers at the SCP Foundation have conducted extensive analysis using neutron imaging, MRI scans, and other methods. But the true nature of SCP-463's
An MRI? You know what? No, it's silver, so it wouldn't be magnetic.
lethal effect remains unknown. All they can observe are the horrifying results: a sudden, violent muscle contraction that bends the human body unnaturally. Currently, SCP-463 is housed in a secure containment site, kept in a small, reinforced glass display case. Transport and handling are strictly regulated, and personnel are prohibited from directly interacting with the spoon under any circumstances. After an incident during testing, food and utensils are no longer allowed near SCP-463's containment area, though the exact details of that incident remain classified. Let this story serve as a reminder: even the simplest, most ordinary objects can mask unimaginable danger. After all, who would have thought something as simple as a spoon could become such a deadly anomaly? Now go and watch another entry from the file.
I have a thought about this, actually. A possible idea of what's happening. The spoon isn't the anomaly. The anomaly is attached to the spoon. That's my thinking. I'm thinking the anomaly is a separate entity from the spoon that's just attached itself to the spoon for some unknown reason.
Files of Dr. Bob, and be sure to subscribe as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.
Really, Dr. Bob?
A man is running for his life, a deadly predator hot on his heels. But no matter how fast he runs, how hard his feet pound the pavement and leg muscles strain, he will never outrun his pursuer.
That's awful.
After all, you can't run from what you can't see.
That's fair.
His lungs scream for air, and he stops to catch his breath. But when he opens his mouth, the air is sucked out of it.
Very
Lungs
possible.
crumpling
Yep.
like wet tissue paper as he wheezes. His blood boils, his eyes roll back.
Oh my god.
He doesn't
what the
even
hell?
have time to scream as he experiences the kind of horrific death that afflicts astronauts lost in the vacuum of space while
my
he
God.
stands in the middle of an ordinary street. No one notices him until he drops to the ground, and they certainly don't notice the shift in the air as a breeze flees the scene. But what was there floating on the air that did such a thing? To understand that, we need to go back to earlier
That's
that day,
horrifying.
before this man had the air ripped from his lungs. Moisture hangs heavy in the warm air. The clouds are thick and uneasy in the dark, greenish sky. Here in Tornado Alley, residents know what this kind of weather means, and they know it's not good news. Anyone with any sense is staying indoors today, windows bolted shut. No one would dare go out now, with a tornado threatening to touch down at any moment. Unless, of course, they're a storm chaser.
Yep.
The man
these
sitting in his
idiots.
truck watching the sky with bright, excited eyes has never used that phrase to describe himself, but it certainly does apply. He chases storms, twisters in particular, along with the rest of his team. Technically, it's for meteorological research, but anyone who knows him knows that he gets a thrill out of chasing down powerful storms, looking danger in the face,
goodness.
and coming back out of it in one piece.
Of course.
He started chasing storms young, slipping out the front door to sneak a peek while the rest of his family ran for the cellar, listening to the sound of the tornado sirens. He would only join the rest of them when he saw that towering funnel of air spinning and spinning at hundreds of miles per hour. Somewhere along the way, he even got himself a couple of degrees in meteorology, all to understand those big behemoths of the sky just a bit better. Now he knows they aren't the fingers of an angry god reaching down to touch the earth, but the natural consequence of the right cocktail of moisture and air, of hot and cool, twisting together until you get, well, a twister. Now he does things with a bit more finesse. He drives a properly equipped truck, he tracks the storms with radar and top-of-the-line equipment, and he has a team to help. Not a big team, mind you. Too many cooks in the kitchen is how people get burned. At least, that's what his mama always used to say.
Oh.
But he's got his best friend and longtime chase partner in the passenger seat, running the computer and keeping an eye on the radar. Then in the back seat, there's the interns, a pair of nice college kids that haul the equipment and keep the operation running. With those two fine fellows dotting the I's and crossing the T's, the leader is free to focus on his passion, the storms. And it looks like there's a big one brewing. They won't get right up in it, not just yet. He has to wait for it to touch down, wait for those churning clouds up there to fulfill their promise. He can tell it won't be long, though. He can see the funnel starting to form, stretching out and down until... Yes! The leader can't help it. He lets out a whoop of excitement. That's a tornado right there, folks. And that means it's go time. His chase partner has already generated a prediction for the tornado's path, so all they need to do is drive around to meet it on the way. He revs the engine, reminds the others to buckle their seatbelts, and speeds across the wide-open field. He veers down a dirt road, pedal pressed to the floor, and skids the truck
Can everybody still hear the video good?
toward the tornado. As they get closer, the team can hear that classic sound, like the roar of a freight train. It's not the biggest they've seen, not the most dangerous by a long shot, but it's still a mighty impressive storm up close. They can feel the truck start to rattle, winds whipping against the windows. The leader shouts over the raging storm, giving the team the heads up. He's about to drive them into the center of the tornado. Everybody holds on tight, ready to ride the storm the way they have so many times before. But as the engine revs and the truck's wheels spin, the team witnesses a sight they've never seen before. Right there in front of them, all of a sudden, the tornado dissipates. All storms subside eventually, of course, but never like this. Never such a sudden dissolution at the height of its strength and activity. But it doesn't matter whether or not it makes sense. It happened. The leader sits in the driver's seat for a moment in silence. All that excitement, all that planning and work has dissipated in an instant, along with the tornado. Soon, the leader's partner breaks the silence with the question on everyone's mind. Now what? One of the interns pipes up from the back, offering to stay here and investigate the area while the others go back to the original site of the tornado's touchdown. She climbs out of the truck and promises to give the team a call when she's finished inspecting the area.
She's not gonna be back.
With that, the other three members of the team speed off, back to their starting point.
Oh boy.
The leader isn't sure what exactly he's looking for, but he needs to do something. Otherwise, the day feels wasted. But no matter how many times he drives the truck back and forth over the area, following the path of the tornado, there are no clues to be found. It just disappeared. Maybe they miscalculated something. Maybe it's just one of those strange quirks of nature. But it seems like it might just be time to cut their losses, pack up, and head back to town for a meal and a strategy session. There's always next time. The intern grabs his phone and calls the other intern to get her location so that they can swing back around and pick her up.
Uh-oh.
But she doesn't answer.
Here it comes.
He calls again. Still no answer. A
Yep,
bit unusual, but it's fine.
She's
That's
dead.
what location tracking is
Dead
for.
as hell.
They track the signal from her phone and drive back over. But when the leader inspects the horizon, ready to call out to the intern and usher her back into the truck, he can't find her anywhere. The three men climb out of the truck, growing increasingly more concerned with every passing moment. Then, they spot it, lying on the ground a few hundred feet ahead.
Yep, she
A
dead
crumpled
as hell.
heap, what could almost be mistaken for a pile of clothes at first glance. But as they approach, they can see the horrible truth. It's her, the intern, lying on the ground. Her eyes are wide,
All these
bulging,
people
and
are gonna
glassy.
die.
Her mouth is stretched open in a silent scream. Not a speck of blood on her, no visible wound to indicate what might have killed her. No broken bones or limbs bent out of place.
Ish.
It's as if she suddenly stopped being able to breathe and dropped dead of suffocation where she stood. At
Horrifying.
first, no one says a word. None of them want to be the first to break the silence and acknowledge what they all see right in front of them. She's dead. Something killed her, and none of them were there to help. The other intern speaks up. He volunteers to call the police, though none of them know exactly what to report. While the intern makes the call, the partner, the right-hand man, grabs the leader's arm. Something's up with the radar, he explains. It's picking up unusual activity,
Oh, boy.
strange currents in the air just above where they're standing now.
That's
Not
bad.
a tornado,
Very bad. Oh,
something
Dios.
else. Something he's never seen before. He understands that the circumstances are extreme, but it could be connected to the girl's death. Maybe the two of them should follow the pattern and check things out. The intern volunteers to stay with his fallen partner and wait for the authorities if the
And
two
then
older
he's
men want to
dead?
go investigate the wind patterns in the meantime. The leader considers for a moment, then decides that if they can't chase a storm, they might as well chase some kind of answer. So the leader and his right-hand man hop back into the truck
They're all
and
gonna
follow
die.
the mystery air currents down the
They're
road.
all dead.
As they drive, the leader asks his partner for continuous
They
updates on the
died the
unusual
moment
weather
they
they're tracking.
arrived.
It doesn't behave like any storm they've seen, like any of the air currents they tend to measure while watching tornadoes form. This particular current seems to bend and weave at random, defying the patterns around as it goes. It doesn't move like the weather, the partner notes. It's more like a swarm of insects, a flight of birds engaging in what ornithologists call murmuration. It's something starlings do, he explains. They fly as flocks in these mesmerizing, unpredictable patterns. But of course, as they look up at the sky, there are no starlings. There are no insects swarming like some biblical plague. Hell, there aren't even clouds anymore, just a wide open blue sky. All of a sudden, the leader feels his partner's grip on his arm again. The air current is doubling back, headed the same way it came. Almost as if, and he knows how silly this sounds, it was headed back to the spot where they found the girl's body. The spot where the living intern is waiting for the police. Both men know how silly it seems to be worried that a rogue air current is going to attack someone, but the leader can't shake the sense of dread that floods his body.
Oh boy.
He jerks the wheel, spinning the truck around and
Oh,
speeding back to the spot where the
this
intern
guy's
is waiting.
gonna die.
On the way, his partner gets a phone call from the kid. He answers, but he can't hear anything on the other side except some kind of interference, like someone blowing into the phone's speakers. Then, the call fails. Something is definitely wrong. When the leader sees the bodies slumped on top of each other, two now where there was one, he slams on the brake so hard that the seatbelt nearly snaps his ribs. But it doesn't. It just knocks the wind out of him for a second as he fumbles with the buckle, then the door. He stumbles out of the truck, and the wind is knocked out of him all over again as he takes in the up-close sight of the two interns, stacked one on top of the other, both wide-eyed, open-mouthed, and dead. The young man has his phone still in his hand, thumb frozen over the previous number he dialed. He called for help, but they didn't make it in time. Not much point in calling the police again. They're already on their way to pick up one body. Now they'll just have two. The leader's knees buckle beneath him, and he sits on the grass, face in his hands.
Damn.
What happened here? It all went so wrong so fast. Sure, all of them knew storm chasing was dangerous when they got into it, but no storm he's ever seen is capable of killing someone like this. Just sucking the life out of them without leaving so much as a scratch.
That's
The leader wipes a
horrifying to
tear from
think
his
about.
eye when he suddenly feels a whoosh of air whip across his face, as if something flew past him at a breakneck speed. He calls out to his partner, asking if the other man felt it too, but he doesn't get an answer. That's odd. The sinking feeling in his gut is back, and he looks up, searching for the other man. There he is, standing just behind the truck, but something's wrong. The other man has his back to the leader, but he's thrashing around and waving his arms like a drowning victim. Slowly, carefully, the leader makes his way around the side of the truck to get a better look at his partner.
This is awful.
It's a sight he'll never forget as long as he lives. The other man's eyes are bulging out of
my
his
God,
face,
this is
blood vessels
horrifying.
bursting. His mouth is wide open, gasping for a breath he can't seem to catch. He struggles against some invisible force, like he's drowning on dry land. No, like all of the oxygen has been sucked out of the air just around him, like he's trapped in a vacuum-sealed bubble. His partner locks eyes with him,
God.
and in spite of the struggling, in spite of his tenuous grasp on life, the leader can see him mouth one word in perfect clarity. Run. The leader doesn't fancy
That's
himself a coward,
terrifying.
has never thought of himself as the kind of man who runs from a threat, but he's also not the kind of man to ignore a friend's dying words. He turns and flees, hearing the dull thud of his best friend's body hitting the ground
Damn.
behind him. Then he hears the whoosh of air, or of something moving through the air. Whatever it is, whatever killed the others, it's coming after him next. He isn't sure exactly what it is, or if he can even
I am wondering how you would even capture something like this.
outrun it, but he's sure as hell going to try. After a lifetime of chasing danger, he won't let the danger catch him. No, sir. But where can he
Yeah.
seek shelter out here in the middle of nowhere? Not much out here but abandoned buildings, farmland, maybe an overpass. But an overpass is nowhere to hide in a tornado, and it certainly won't protect him from whatever's after him. Then he spots it up ahead, a metal grain silo, recently reinforced from the looks of it. Normally, he'd never dream of climbing into one of those. His mother warned him growing up about how easy it was to slip beneath the surface and suffocate. But if he's lucky, and he's got his fingers crossed he just might be, it'll be empty. Only one way to find out. He climbs the ladder faster than he's ever climbed anything before,
terrifying.
and opens the top of the silo. He peers down inside, and his heart leaps. There's some corn in there, but not much. Not deep enough for him to get lost beneath the surface. Hopefully enough to break his fall. He climbs inside, seals the thing up behind him, and drops. He hears his leg break before he feels it, the sick crunch of bone. Then, the pain. But amidst the agony of the freshly broken bone, he takes gulps of stale, musty air and thanks his lucky stars that he can still breathe. The question is, for how long?
How will he get
Something
out?
thumps against the side of the grain silo, like a tree branch falling. Then comes a rattling, like strong winds shaking the metal walls.
I guess
It
that's
travels
how we
all
get
over the
out.
surface of the silo, shaking every inch from bottom all the way up to the top. But as the rattling continues, the predator intent on catching its prey, the man realizes that he has picked just the right place to hide. Whatever's after him, it can't get in.
Not yet.
Now he just has to wait for it to get tired. Hopefully, it'll be before he dies of thirst in here. An hour passes, then another, then another. Then, quiet. He can't explain how, but he knows that whatever it was is gone now. He calls for help and tells the officer on the phone where to find the fallen bodies of his friends. He gives up his life of storm chasing, afraid of what he
Damn.
might encounter while he's in pursuit of another tornado. He's never been scared of them, but what else is out there? As his mama said, the devil you know beats the devil you don't. He'll never know, but this particular devil was SCP-885.
Later on, he dies
SCP-885
to
is a
this
living
scene.
creature of unknown origin and composition. Wherever it goes, it displaces all fluids within its perimeter, both liquid and gas. The Foundation has attempted to analyze the creature's interior, but there appears to be no known matter within. It is, as far as anyone can tell, essentially a complete vacuum. Sonar imaging has allowed the Foundation to determine the perimeter of SCP-885, which is a cloud of about 200 ovoid elements intersecting and dividing seemingly at random. Whether it is one single creature made up of these ovoids or a swarm of smaller creatures is currently unknown.
I'd say it's a swarm,
SCP-885 is
maybe?
able to manipulate its difference in pressure to move itself through space. It is able to move through fluids and pass through porous solids such as concrete. Metal and tempered glass, however, are able to contain it or keep it out. Any item fully immersed within SCP-885 will behave as it would in a vacuum. When this item is a living thing, well, the results are not pretty.
Yeesh.
Which is unfortunate, because SCP-885 is a predator of sorts, and all living, breathing creatures are its ideal prey. It tracks this prey via atmospheric vibrations, and once it has found a target, the cloud will surround it. The creature can try to run, but once it is in the clutches of SCP-885, it is already far too late. Once the prey is surrounded, SCP-885 will extract all fluids and gases via negative pressure,
Oh
and
my
the victim will
God.
perish from hypoxia and ebulism. In layman's terms, the lack of oxygen and the formation of bubbles in bodily liquids due to decreased environmental pressure, respectively. Should its intended prey manage to escape, SCP-885 will chase after them and hunt them down. It can move at up to 12 meters per second in a standard atmosphere,
fast.
though it is a bit slower in denser air. Most prey that attempt to escape are unsuccessful. Once the prey is dead, SCP-885 will lose interest. It is uncertain whether it feeds on the prey in any way or if it just kills for entertainment. I suppose its motives don't matter all that much in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Either way, when SCP-885 targets something, that thing winds up dead. SCP-885 is kept within a welded steel container
Good.
in an undisclosed Foundation storage area. This area must be kept at negative pressure at all times in order to reduce the possibility of a containment breach. Additionally, air movement within the storage area must be monitored at all times. If a containment breach should ever occur, I shudder to think what might happen. SCP-885 is nearly undetectable in an
Oh my
ordinary
God.
atmosphere. Even in liquids, it only looks like a cluster of bubbles. Frankly, it's a miracle the Foundation was ever able to contain the thing in the first place. If SCP-885 were ever to get out, it would likely take a while for security personnel to even realize anything had changed. For this reason, any unexplained shifts in the air near SCP-885's enclosure are to be reported immediately. Staff have also been advised to remember that SCP-885 can use its pressure shifts to hold doors closed, trapping a victim in a room with no escape. Because sound cannot travel in a vacuum, the victim would not even be able to call for help. In the clutches of SCP-885, just as in space, no one can hear you scream. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-1352, Sentient Dust Devil. Josiah watched from the porch as his mom climbed into the van, its sides covered in painted flowers and peace signs. She knelt in front of him one last time, ruffling his hair with a sad smile.
I'm sorry, Josiah,
she said, her voice soft.
Love has to be free. It can't be bottled up in a marriage, you know?
She kissed his forehead.
What baloney. This chick just wants to go around and have fun and leave her poor child alone with his father.
Stood up and waved as she climbed into the driver's seat. Josiah waved back, not feeling much at all. The van rattled away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and an empty driveway. But that was okay. The person Josiah really admired wasn't leaving. It was his dad, standing right next to him. Josiah's dad was an exterminator. To most people, it wasn't exactly a heroic job, but to Josiah, it was everything. His dad was the one people called when their homes were overrun, when ants built armies under the floorboards or roaches made a mess in the dark corners. He watched as his dad dealt with all kinds of pests without a shred of fear, and Josiah tagged along every weekend he could. He loved it. Even more, he loved being part of it. His dad even let him kill a few bugs sometimes, laughing when Josiah stomped them out. His dad gave him a nickname, Blug the Bug Killer, and Josiah wore it like a badge of honor.
Aww.
Years went by, and Josiah grew into that nickname. Josiah followed in his dad's footsteps, becoming an exterminator just like him. He got a job at National Pest Extermination Incorporated, and he loved it. It wasn't just about the work. It was the sense of power, the idea that he was the one people relied on to reclaim their space. Josiah dreamed of running his own extermination company one day, making his dad proud. He wasn't afraid to take risks either. He'd crush wasp nests with his bare hands just to prove he could handle it, laughing through the stings, all while his co-workers and clients looked on in shock. But Josiah never noticed their reactions. All he felt was power.
Crazy.
Smashing those pests made him feel invincible, just like his dad had seemed all those years ago. Then came the day that changed everything. Josiah was working a job at an old cabin. Termites had turned the place into a crumbling disaster. He wasn't alone this time. A co-worker had come along, standing beside him as they looked at the empty, run-down cabin. "Looks like no one's home, Josiah," his co-worker said, glancing around nervously. "Maybe we should come back later?" But Josiah wasn't interested in waiting. He shook his head, muttering something about time being money, and marched right up to the door. Josiah stormed inside without a second thought, spray in one hand, lighter in the other. Flames shot across the dry wood, termites scattering in panic. Some caught fire, buzzing through the air in a frenzy. Josiah didn't care. He torched everything in sight. His co-worker stayed outside, watching in shock as the situation unraveled. The termites went into chaos, some on fire, buzzing through the air, others scattering in a frenzy. Josiah didn't stop. He kept going, screaming for them to bring it on, smashing and torching anything that moved. "Josiah, get out of there!" His partner's voice cracked, frantic. "The whole place is gonna blow!" But Josiah didn't hear him. He was cackling, a wild laugh echoing through the smoke-filled cabin as he watched the bugs scatter, some of them burning, others crushed under his boots. "Burn, you worthless pests!" he shouted, oblivious to everything else. His co-worker could only watch in horror as the flames roared louder, swallowing the cabin whole, and Josiah stood right in the middle of it. flames licking at the walls, the ceiling giving way above him. Everything became a blur. Heat, smoke, the world caving in. He blinked,
There it goes.
and suddenly, it was all gone. No fire, no collapsing cabin, no smoke clogging his lungs. Instead, Josiah found himself standing in a small shop. He looked around, eyes wide, taking in shelves packed with every extermination supply he could think of. He glanced up at the window, where the sign, "Blug's Pesky Solutions," was painted in bold letters. His reflection was there too, distorted in the glass, but Josiah didn't notice it, not yet. All he could focus on was the name. He couldn't believe
Wow.
it. Blug's? It's real? He whispered, his voice barely audible, tinged with disbelief. The smell of chemicals, the sharp tang of bug spray. It hit him all at once, taking him back to those dusty supply stores he used to visit with his dad. This was the shop he'd always dreamed of opening, the one he'd imagined owning someday.
That's nice.
It was perfect. Too perfect. He felt disoriented,
Did he die
like he
and
was
go to
drifting in
heaven?
a strange dream. But everything felt so incredibly real. Josiah walked through the shop, but something felt off. He finally saw his
Oh,
reflection in one of
no,
the windows
it's more like
and
Hal,
stopped,
huh?
staring. His face was gone, replaced by glossy, segmented eyes, black and unblinking, like an insect's. He looked down at his hands, only to realize they weren't hands anymore. Instead, they were sharp, jointed limbs, the frontmost of 4 insect-like legs, clicking slightly as he moved. His 2 hind legs, though strangely more humanoid in structure, still looked alien to him, covered in a hard, chitinous shell that glistened under the sharp
Horrifying.
lights. Josiah felt the movement above his
body
head,
for it.
a
Wonderful.
twitching sensation, and realized he had long antennae, each one stretching out nearly as tall as he was. He stood there, towering at over 2 meters, looking like something out of a nightmare, an enormous bug, distorted into a humanoid form. Panic surged
Ugh.
through him, but
These
before he
noises
could
are
react,
gross.
the bell above the door chimed. A customer walked in, white cane tapping on the floor. Josiah swallowed his panic. He focused on what he knew, helping people, solving their pest problems. Hello, welcome to Blug's Pesky Solutions, where we'll provide you with swift solutions on the fly, Josiah said, trying to sound cheerful, his voice only quivering slightly. My name's Blug. How can I help you today? The customer smiled politely, unaware of anything unusual.
Probably 'cause
they
he's
explained
blind.
that they needed help with the bedbugs that had taken over their apartment. Josiah nodded, forcing a grin. Bedbugs, huh? Nasty little critters. But don't you worry, we'll get them sorted out in no time. He worked with his usual enthusiasm, pretending everything was fine, guiding the customer through possible solutions, the feeling of normalcy almost enough to calm him. And when the customer left, satisfied, Josiah allowed himself to believe it. Maybe it was all in his head. Maybe he wasn't really a bug. The second customer was different. Josiah was behind the shelves restocking when he heard the door chime. He stepped out to greet the new arrival, antennae twitching slightly as he moved. The moment the customer laid eyes on
this
him,
one's not
they
fine.
froze, staring stiff as a board at the sight of this towering, sapient, insect-like figure. Josiah did his best to offer a reassuring smile, or whatever the equivalent of a smile was now, and launched into his usual speech. Hello, welcome to Blug's Pesky Solutions. How can I... The customer's face went pale. They didn't say a
Oh,
word,
boy.
just stood there, trembling, eyes locked on him. And then, to Josiah's confusion, he heard the unmistakable sound of liquid hitting the floor. The customer had wet themselves. Josiah's eyes widened. He reached for the counter, grabbed a napkin, and took a careful step forward. Here, you might need this, he said, trying to keep his voice gentle. In response, the customer just screamed, a loud, piercing
goodness.
wail that made Josiah flinch. They turned and bolted, running out the door, their footsteps fading as they sprinted down the street. Josiah stood there, utterly befuddled. He turned back toward the front of the shop, catching another glimpse of himself in the glass window. His glossy, segmented eyes stared back at him, the long antennae swaying slightly, his insect
Right.
legs braced against the floor. He swallowed, his mandibles clicking as unease settled deep in his chest. This appearance, this bizarre reflection, gnawed at him. But it couldn't be real, right? He couldn't be a giant bipedal bug. Could he? Josiah stood there, stunned. He turned back to his reflection in the glass and saw the truth. He was indeed a giant insect-like creature.
Why?
Antennae
How?
twitched on
What
his head.
purpose?
His legs were thin and jointed. His skin, or exoskeleton, was shiny like a beetle's shell. It didn't make sense. He couldn't be a bug. No, he was Blug, and he was an exterminator. Moments later, the shop door burst open again, and the customer returned, this time with a police officer in tow. The officer's eyes went wide as he took in the sight of Josiah, antennae twitching nervously, his jointed arms raised in a surrendering gesture. "Whoa! Stay where you are!" the officer barked, immediately drawing his
what
weapon.
the hell?
Josiah's heart, or whatever was left of it, pounded in his chest.
Do roaches
He
have
raised his
hearts?
insect-like hands higher, trying to show he wasn't a threat.
Wait, officer, I can explain.
Josiah's voice wavered, sounding almost as alien as he looked. "Get on the ground, now!" the officer yelled, his eyes never leaving Josiah. The customer from earlier was standing behind the officer, pointing at Josiah, shaking visibly, as if urging the officer to do something, anything, to make this nightmare disappear.
Please, this is just a misunderstanding.
Josiah said, antennae drooping as he slowly tried to move back. He could hear the officer calling for backup into his radio, reporting that he had some kind of giant bug that was definitely not human. Not human? He flinched at the officer's harsh description, the words cutting deeper than any sting. He could feel the shame creeping over him, hot and suffocating. He just wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole, anything to make this humiliation stop. How could this be real? How could he be something so monstrous that even the police looked at him like a threat?
What the
Please.
hell?
He whispered, his voice breaking. But the officer's glare never softened, the barrel of his gun never lowering. All Josiah could do was stand there, feeling smaller than he ever had, wishing he could disappear. And then, just like that, everything vanished. The shop, the officer, the shelves, all of it gone in an instant. Josiah felt himself blink out of existence along with it, leaving behind only emptiness and confusion. But what the police officer witnessed that day wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the discovery of something much more dangerous. Josiah, once a man, was no longer just a person. He was something far stranger. Shortly after the incident, Blug's pesky solutions caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, following reports of a vanishing shop with an insect-like humanoid at the helm. It didn't take long for the Foundation to begin investigating and classify the anomaly as SCP-7386. Foundation agents initially monitored the anomaly for several weeks, observing the demanifestation and remanifestation patterns. Each time the shop appeared, it would replace an existing building, only to vanish again when its true nature was revealed. SCP-7386 doesn't have a fixed location. Instead, it pops up randomly around the world, replacing another store in the area. One day, it may show up in a shopping plaza in Cape Town, and the next, it could appear in a strip mall in Colorado. It never stays in one spot for
That
long.
makes sense.
Once Josiah's shop disappears, the original store reappears as if nothing had happened. Inside, the shop always looks the same. It has a single floor with aisles packed with every product imaginable for dealing with pests, especially insects. There's a small office area and a counter for Josiah to assist his customers. Josiah is the sole worker, and if asked, he tells everyone he owns the shop and runs it just as he had always dreamed. Josiah, or SCP-7386-1, stands over 2 meters tall, with long antennae nearly as long as his body. His 4 front legs are jointed like an insect's, while his 2 hind legs remain more humanoid, making his movements surprisingly smooth. He looks like a bizarre blend of man and cerambicid beetle, but he still acts like the enthusiastic exterminator he once was. When dealing with customers, SCP-7386-1 is friendly, almost overly eager, so long as no one mentions his insectoid appearance. If someone does, his demeanor shifts to anger and distress, triggering another demanifestation. The Foundation knows better than to provoke him. Although accounts of unusual
Other
phenomena
than that,
potentially linked to
seems like he's
SCP-7386
living a
stretch
good
back to the
life.
late 1990s, The Foundation
wonder
first
why.
formally
How?
identified SCP-7386 during its manifestation in Cape Town on October 12, 2023. Foundation agents stationed nearby quickly reported it, and a squad was dispatched to try and contain it. But before they could do anything, the shop, along with SCP-7386-1, vanished, demanifesting right before their eyes. They soon realized that whenever anyone commented on SCP-7386-1's bug-like appearance or tried to force him out of the shop, the whole place would vanish without a trace. Anyone still inside during a demanifestation? Well, they would disappear too, never to be seen again. The Foundation has tried to develop protocols to contain SCP-7386 whenever it reappeared, and have even managed to restrict access to the shop during one of its manifestations in Providence, Rhode Island, and later in Telluride, Colorado. There they boarded up windows, hung permanently closed signs on the door, and kept a close watch on it with disguised personnel to ensure no one could go inside. Foundation investigations have revealed records pertaining to the National Pest Extermination Incorporated and documentation that refers to an exterminator who worked there named Josiah, but the details were vague.
I genuinely wonder why that
Foundation
happened
continues
to
to dig into those old logs, trying to piece together the story of how a man
Was he
turned into
always
something so
anomalous?
monstrous,
And it
yet
just
still
happened
clung to the
after he
only
died or
life he ever
something?
knew, running a pest control shop, even if he is now more pest than human. SCP-7386 remains officially classified as a Keter-level anomaly due to its unpredictable nature and dangerous ability to demanifest without warning. And since SCP-7386-1 displays highly volatile emotional responses when confronted about his transformation, the SCP Foundation maintains strict containment protocols for SCP-7386. Any personnel interacting with SCP-7386-1 must avoid direct mention of its insectoid form, as triggering its emotional response results in immediate demanifestation. To date, no survivors have been recovered from inside the shop during these events. SCP-7386 remains uncontained, and its unpredictable manifestations continue to pose a constant threat to public safety. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, and be sure to
careful,
subscribe as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.
And here's the last video.
Back
for the
then, I was
night.
still a college student, delivering pizzas to make ends meet. Most nights,
This is from IMR Scary Tales, and it's one of their most recent videos. I came across it while I was looking for videos to react to tonight, and I watched a few seconds of it beforehand. It's a very different art style and
were the same
animation
routine,
style.
except that one. It was the kind of night that
kinda
still
reminds
keeps
me
me
of the
up.
Gorillaz
It was around
style.
10:30 p.m. when I got an order for a house on the outskirts of town. The place was isolated and old,
Looks
with
nice,
overgrown
though.
grass and dim lights barely glowing through the curtains. Something
good
about
on
it
you,
felt
IMR
wrong
Scary
from the
Tales,
moment I
for
pulled into the
being-
driveway. I
getting
walked up,
better
pizza in
animation.
hand, and knocked. A man answered, looking disheveled. Might be in his mid-40s. Dark circles hounded under his eyes.
Pizza delivery.
I said,
Goodness.
trying to sound upbeat. He looked confused. You sure you got the right place? I didn't order any pizza.
This is 1489 Oakride, right?
I asked, double-checking the slip. He hesitated. Yeah, that's my address, but no one here ordered anything. Thinking I might have screwed up, I asked if he could check with the others in the
I mean, yeah, that's probably why it demanifests so often. I'll be right back in just a minute. I gotta go to the bathroom real quick.
house. He turned and called
back.
Babe, did you order a pizza? A woman's voice responded from further inside, followed by 2 toddlers poking their heads around the corner. They all exchanged confused looks. No one had ordered anything. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number listed on the order. After a few rings, a raspy voice answered. Yeah, that's the right address.
They're saying no one here ordered pizza. Are you sure?
Cool.
The voice on the other end chuckled, low and eerie. I'm in the shed at the bottom of the driveway. Bring it here. I froze, my heart skipping a beat.
The shed?
The man at the door overheard me and looked pale, his eyes wide with sudden realization.
Uh-oh.
We don't have anyone staying in the shed, he said, his voice shaky. The woman came to the door, clutching a robe tightly around herself.
What's going on, honey?
I repeated what I'd heard, and the air around us seemed to turn heavy. The man grabbed a flashlight from inside,
You should have fucking grabbed a gun.
ignoring his wife's protests. I'll check it out, he muttered, clearly unnerved. I followed him down the driveway. My feet were heavy as a sick feeling twisted in my gut. The shed at the end was barely visible in the dim light. Rotting wood, broken windows, a loose padlock hanging from the door. Every step closer made my skin crawl. The man aimed his flashlight at the door and pulled it open. The hinges let out a slow, eerie creak. The smell hit us first, damp, moldy, with a foul...
Yeah, call the cops first. Call the cops, grab a weapon, anything other than just going directly to it with a goddamn
His flashlight flickered across the inside. There, in the corner, was a dirty mattress, surrounded by crumpled blankets, old food wrappers, and empty cans. The walls were covered in scratches. Words.
I see you. I hear you. I watch you.
My stomach churned. Someone had been living here, right under their noses, watching them. For how long? Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. The same number. My hand shook as I answered.
Hello?
The voice was clearer now, calm and cold. You should have left the pizza at the door. Then, from inside the house, we heard it. A loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. My heart dropped. We ran back to the house.
It almost looks like an anime
was at the
too,
door,
though.
frozen, pale as a sheet.
Someone's inside.
She whispered, her
no
voice
shit,
barely
dumbass.
audible. The man, still holding the flashlight, grabbed a kitchen knife and entered the house, his steps cautious. I followed, my pulse raced. The lights flickered
Dude, why hasn't she run away
as we
yet?
stepped into the living room, and there, standing in the corner, was a figure, a filthy man with wild eyes and a twisted grin, holding a crowbar.
Oh,
He
that's
didn't
horrifying.
belong here, yet he was, standing among their family's belongings
did
like
you
he'd been
grab a
waiting for this
kitchen
chance all his life. I told you, Julian, I'd always be there, waiting for you. He stared directly at Julian as if trying to make a point. Before I could
see.
react, the
Crazy
man with the knife
ex-boyfriend.
lunged at him. The
Wonderful.
intruder swung the crowbar, catching him on the arm. The sound of bone hitting metal echoed through the room. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a lamp, and smashed it over the intruder's head. He
Good.
staggered, then collapsed, unconscious. Panting, I backed away, shaking, the broken lamp still in my hands. The family stood frozen. Julian clutched her children tightly and sobbed. The man called the police. His
Fucking finally, why didn't you call the police first? Have them deal with this. That's what they're
hand
for.
trembling as he relayed the details. The hobo was an obsessed ex-lover and
Knew
couldn't
it.
let go, even after Julian had moved on years ago. They dragged the psychopath out,
Crazy
but as they
son
shoved
of a
him into the
bitch.
back of the squad car, he turned and smiled. I can never let you go, he promised, just loud enough for me to hear. I never delivered to that neighborhood again.
I hope they're alright. Oh my goodness, that's terrifying.
It's strange,
Ah,
the way
this
you
looks
never
like
think it'll
classic
happen to
IMR
you.
scary
Those
tales.
stories on the news, the tragic ones, where someone's loved one disappears. I always thought they happened to other people. Not us. Not my mom.
See, that's the thing. You always think it's other people. It's always other people. But it's always like that until you're the other people.
I guess that's what everyone thinks.
Yeah.
Until it does happen. I was 13 when it
There we
happened.
go. Classic
It was just a
IMR
regular
Scary
Thursday
Tales
night.
animation
She kissed me
here.
goodbye before heading out. Her eyes were tired, but still filled with the kind of warmth only my mom could give.
I'll be back soon.
She said. She never did. And I didn't know until it was too late. That night
Damn.
stretched on endlessly. I sat in the dark, watching the clock tick, hoping any second the door would creak open, and she'd walk in with that tired smile. Midnight came and went. Then, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, still nothing. The silence in the house grew louder,
Jeez.
suffocating, and dread started creeping in. It was around 3 o'clock when my phone buzzed with a live location.
Mom?
She was in a parking lot. But why? My stomach twisted. I called her again and again, but every call went straight to voicemail.
Oh, no.
Each unanswered ring made my heart pound harder. Was she stuck? Hurt? In danger? I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my hoodie and bolted out the door. The streets
you
were
dumb
cold
bitch.
and empty. When I got to Waverly Roads, I just couldn't walk anymore. Clutching my phone tight, I ran faster than I ever had in my life. My mind racing, praying that I'd find her car, that everything would be fine, and that this would all just be a misunderstanding. But when I turned the corner into that dark parking lot, I knew her car was there, parked at an odd angle, headlights still on, but no sign of her. That's when I saw her.
Oh my god.
Lying in the lot, her body twisted in a way that bodies aren't supposed to twist. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. She was so still. Her face was pale, her eyes open but lifeless. It was like the air had been sucked out of the world,
No.
and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I dropped to my knees beside her, trembling.
Mom?
The word barely made it past
my
my
goodness.
lips. I reached out, touching her cold hand, and that's when I heard it. The crunch of gravel behind me. A slow, deliberate step. I whipped around, my breath caught in my throat. And there she was. Miranda, my father's wife, my stepmother. Though I never
Crazy
called her
bitch.
that. She stood there in the dim light. In her hand was something I couldn't process at first.
You shouldn't have come here, kid.
She said, slinging the rope in the air.
Oh goodness.
You did that? Why?
It wasn't a question. She took a step closer, her smile growing darker.
Custody, honey. Your father wanted you back, but the bitch wasn't ready to let go. So, we had to
What a
make sure
horrible
she
person.
couldn't fight anymore.
My chest tightened with horror. This wasn't just about Mom. This was about me.
Don't worry. Your dad knows too. Family means everything.
She said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. She started moving towards me, slow and steady, like a predator toying with its prey.
Now, why don't you come with me, and we'll make sure everything gets sorted out.
I didn't need a better trigger. Sprinted across the lot,
Oh my
the
God,
cold
it is
air
time to call
biting
the
at my
cops.
face as Miranda's footsteps echoed behind me. She was faster than I expected, closing the distance
How is
as
this
I
a
weaved
pizza
between
delivery
parked
horror
cars,
story?
trying to put anything between us. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, she'd catch me, and I knew what would happen if she did. I could hear her breathing, heavy and ragged just behind me.
Oh,
You can't run forever, kid. We'll find you, just like we found that hoe.
Dad! Miranda wasn't lying!
The words
Whoa, why
sliced
does her
through
dad
me,
look
and I
like
felt my
that?
chest tighten with fear. I wasn't running just for me now. I was running for my mother. Up ahead, I saw the
thank God,
faint
a
glow
police
of a
stop
streetlight.
station.
Hope surged through me as I spotted the small, nondescript building, a police station. I pushed myself harder, every step agonizing as I neared the door. My fingers grazed the cold metal handle just as I felt Dad's hand grab the back
God.
of my hoodie, yanking me backward.
Yell,
I
yell,
stumbled,
yell.
his breath hot on my neck, his grip tightening. "Didn't your mom tell you? You're coming with us!" he hissed. In a moment of pure adrenaline, I twisted, slipping out of his grasp and throwing myself at the door. It flung open, and I collapsed inside, gasping for air. The officer behind the desk stood up, startled,
God.
as I slammed the door shut and locked it.
They killed Mom!
I screamed, tears streaming down my face.
They're outside! Please help me!
Oh my God.
The officer's face paled as he rushed to the window, peering out into the night. Miranda and Dad were convicted, but I knew everything wasn't finished, for in the dark, I'd always hear Mom screaming.
I don't understand
Delivering
how that was a
pizzas wasn't
horror
exactly
story
my
about
dream
pizza
job, but
delivery.
it paid the rent. That Friday night seemed like any other, but then I got an order to deliver to the local hospital. A hospital at 11 p.m.? I figured maybe the night shift needed a break from whatever sad excuse for food they served in the cafeteria. I pulled up to the front of Holy Spirit Hospital. The parking lot was eerily deserted. The place always gave me the creeps. I walked inside. At the front desk was a half-asleep receptionist, slumped over, headphones in. "Pizza delivery?" He didn't look up, just pointed toward a hallway. "Junior doctor's on second floor. Break room, elevator down that way." But the elevator down the hallway wasn't working. Rather than going back to the receptionist, I walked further and saw another elevator. It looked old. Its doors creaked as they opened. Without thinking much,
I'd prefer the stairs.
I stepped inside. The doors slid behind me, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man standing in the corner
That's
wearing
a ghost.
scrubs. He looked off. His skin was clammy, pale, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His face was twisted in anger, or maybe pain, but his eyes, they were dead, flat, unblinking, staring straight ahead. "Rough shift?" He didn't respond, just stood there, a yellow wristband on his hand. I tried to speak again, figuring he was just too tired to chat. "You a doctor or patient?" Nothing, not even a grunt this time. I glanced up at the elevator panel, watching the floor slowly tick by. The lights inside flickered for a second. That's when I heard it. A soft thud, like something heavy dropped just above us. "Did you hear that?" I turned to look at him. The man's head had jerked slightly to the side. His neck snapped at an unnatural angle. His eyes, once staring ahead, were now locked onto me, wide and wild. Thud. Louder this time. The sound of something or someone slamming against the top of the elevator. I backed up, my breath catching in my throat, and frantically pressed the button for the next floor. I didn't care where it stopped. I just needed out of that elevator. The man didn't move,
Fucking
didn't
grudge
respond.
noises.
His twisted neck stayed locked on me, his lips curling up in a strange manner. He looked sick. I suddenly remembered that the hospital had a specialized mental ward, and it spooked me. That man could probably be a mental patient. Finally, the doors opened,
thank
and I
goodness,
bolted out of the
right.
elevator. I turned around to catch my breath, and the elevator door slammed shut. He was still inside, but as the doors closed, I swore I saw his hand reach out toward me, like he was trying to follow. The hallway was silent, too silent. As I walked, my footsteps echoed too loudly. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. "Hello?" No answer. I passed another door, the window smeared with something dark. I squinted, stepping closer, when suddenly, bang! The door rattled violently, as if
this is
something
like a
inside
horror
had
game.
slammed into it. I jumped back, heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the door, holding my breath, waiting for something to burst through. But after a moment, the hallway fell back into silence. That is when I saw what the sign on the door read. Mortuary. I was done. I wasn't delivering anything. I needed to leave. I turned on my heel and sprinted toward the stairwell, throwing the door open and barreling down the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached the first floor, I flung the door open, nearly crashing into a young doctor standing in the hallway. Whoa, slow down. You all right? I couldn't catch my breath, words spilling out as I tried to explain. There's a guy. Elevator. Yellow wristband. Something's wrong, man. Could be a psycho on the loose. His face went pale as soon as I mentioned the wristband. Wait,
I've
yellow?
heard this story before.
Are you sure? I nodded, still panting. His expression tightened. That's not possible. The yellow wristbands, they're for the deceased. From the critical care unit. I froze. My skin prickled as a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I stammered, trying to process what he was saying. But he was in the elevator with me. That elevator's been closed for months. My throat became heavy. A strange shiver ran down my spine. I didn't argue. I didn't wait for more explanations. I just turned and bolted for the exit. But as I reached the doors, the hospital's automatic doors slid open by themselves, as if expecting me. A cold gust blew through, and then I heard it, the sound that would haunt me for weeks after. A soft, rasping voice from behind me, too close to my ear. Next time I follow you.
Yeah. Well, time to never go back to that hospital again. Oh my god. Absolutely not. Anyways, thank you all for joining me on this spooky, scary Saturday. I hope you all enjoyed. You guys have an awesome possum night, day, or afternoon. As always, stay out of traffic. Stay out of the walls, ceilings, crawl spaces, etc. Yeah, not good is an understatement. Stay out of car engine compartments. Stay hydrated. Stay awesome, possums. Yeah, that was really freaking scary. You guys have a great night. Love you all.